Sarah Martinez had grease under her fingernails and oil stains on her uniform when the alarm bells started ringing across the forward operating base. She was hunched over the engine of a Humvee, her small frame disappearing into the mechanical chaos of pistons and cables. The other soldiers often forgot she was there, which suited her just fine. Being invisible meant fewer questions about why a woman was fixing their vehicles instead of staying behind the wire. The daughter of a Detroit auto mechanic, Sarah had grown up in her father's garage, learning to diagnose engine problems by sound alone before she could properly reach the pedals. When she enlisted, the Army tested her mechanical aptitude and immediately assigned her to motor pool operations. What they didn't know was that her father had also been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, and he'd taught her to shoot before she learned to drive. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag as she watched Navy SEALs sprint across the compound toward their helicopters. Team Bravo was heading out on another classified mission, and from the urgency in their movements, it wasn't going to be routine. She'd worked on their vehicles before, had overheard fragments of conversations. These men operated in the shadows, striking targets that officially didn't exist. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison paused near her workstation, his gear heavy with ammunition and tactical equipment. He'd always been polite to her, never treating her like she didn't belong. "Martinez, if anything happens to our ride out there, we're counting on you to keep the backup vehicles running," he said with a grim smile. Sarah nodded, watching as the team loaded into their helicopters. She had no idea that in 6 hours she would be the only thing standing between them and death. Right now she was just the mechanic, invisible and forgotten exactly the way she preferred it. The helicopters lifted off into the Afghan sky, disappearing over the mountains where American forces had been fighting an endless war. Back in the motor pool, Sarah returned to her work, but something felt different. The base seemed quieter than usual, and the radio chatter had an edge of tension she couldn't ignore. She'd learned to read the mood of a military installation the same way she read engine diagnostics. Something was building, and it wasn't good. Her hands moved automatically through the maintenance routine, but her mind was elsewhere. Her father had always told her that being underestimated was a weapon itself. People who didn't see you coming couldn't prepare for what you might do. Sarah had spent her entire military career being underestimated, but she'd also spent it preparing for the moment when being invisible would no longer be enough. The sun was setting over the Afghan mountains when the first distress call came through. Team Bravo was in trouble, and Sarah's quiet world was about to explode into violence. The radio crackled to life at 1847 hours, and Sarah could hear the strain in Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice even through the static.
"Base, this is Bravo Team. We are compromised."
"Repeat, we are compromised. Requesting immediate extraction." Sarah stopped working and moved closer to the communications tent where officers were gathering around the radio equipment. The mission had been simple on paper. Team Bravo was supposed to infiltrate a compound in the mountains where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. They were supposed to be in and out within 2 hours, but something had gone terribly wrong. "Bravo Team, what's your status?" came the response from Base Command. "We've got approximately 200 hostiles surrounding our position." Intelligence was wrong about the numbers. This isn't just a safe house, it's a major staging area. We're pinned down in a small building with limited ammunition and no clear extraction route. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 200 enemies against 8 SEALs was impossible odds, even for the most elite soldiers. The base commander was already mobilizing a rescue mission, but the nearest available helicopter support was 3 hours away. Even if they could get there faster, landing in a hot zone surrounded by that many enemies would be suicide for the rescue team. "Can you hold your position until reinforcements arrive?" the commander asked, though everyone listening knew it was a desperate question. "Negative, sir. We've got maybe 40 minutes of ammunition left at current rate of fire. They're testing our defenses with probe attacks, but they'll launch a full assault soon. Request permission to attempt breakout." Sarah looked at the map spread across the command table. The compound was 60 miles away through mountain terrain that vehicles couldn't navigate. The SEALs were trapped in terrain that favored the enemy, with no support and dwindling supplies. Every tactical option looked like a death sentence. The base commander rubbed his face, the weight of 8 lives pressing down on him. "Bravo Team, maintain defensive positions. We're working on extraction options." But Sarah could see in his eyes that there were no good options. The rescue helicopters would arrive to find 8 body bags, not 8 live soldiers. She thought about Morrison's words earlier, about keeping the backup vehicles running. An idea began forming in her mind, an idea so dangerous and unlikely that she almost dismissed it immediately. The communications officer turned up the radio as Morrison's voice came through again, calmer now but with an underlying tension that spoke of men who knew they were about to die. "Base, if we don't make it out, tell our families we went down fighting. Bravo team out." Sarah looked at the map again, tracing the route to the compound with her finger. There was a service road that wound through the mountains, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. It was too dangerous for a convoy, too exposed for a helicopter approach, but maybe, just maybe, it was crazy enough to work. Sarah stared at the map for another 30 seconds before making a decision that would either save 8 lives or add her name to the casualty list. She walked away from the command tent and headed straight for the motor pool, her mind racing through equipment inventories and tactical calculations. The modified Humvee sat in Bay 3, armored and equipped with additional communication gear. It had been her pet project for months, reinforcing the engine compartment and upgrading the suspension for mountain terrain. What the other mechanics didn't know was that she'd also been quietly adding modifications that weren't in any manual. Extra ammunition storage, reinforced firing ports, and an engine tuned for maximum performance at high altitude. Sarah began loading equipment with mechanical precision. Her father's old sniper rifle, broken down and hidden in her personal gear locker, 500 rounds of ammunition, medical supplies, water and rations. She moved quickly but carefully, knowing that if anyone saw what she was doing, they'd stop her before she could leave the base. The radio in the motor pool crackled with updates from Bravo team. Their situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy was moving closer, testing their defenses with increasingly aggressive probes. Sarah estimated they had maybe 20 minutes before the final assault began. She climbed into the Humvee and started the engine, feeling the familiar vibration of a perfectly tuned motor. This vehicle could handle anything the Afghan mountains could throw at it, but what she was planning would push both machine and driver far beyond their design limits. Sarah drove toward the main gate, her heart pounding but her hands steady on the wheel. The guard looked surprised to see her, especially this close to nightfall.
Where are you heading, Martinez?
"Supply run to Forward Base Charlie," she lied smoothly. "Emergency repair parts for their generators." The guard checked his clipboard, looking confused. "I don't have any authorization for—" "It came down from Colonel Hansen 10 minutes ago," Sarah said, knowing the guard wouldn't dare question a direct order from the base commander, even if he couldn't verify it. "Those generators fail tonight and 100 soldiers freeze in the mountains." The gate opened and Sarah drove into the Afghan wilderness. She had committed herself now. There was no turning back and no backup plan. She was one woman in a vehicle, driving toward a firefight where 200 enemies were trying to kill 8 of the most elite soldiers in the American military. The service road was worse than she'd expected. Carved into the mountainside decades ago, it was barely maintained and full of hairpin turns that dropped off into 1,000-foot ravines. Sarah pushed the Humvee as hard as she dared, knowing that speed was more important than caution. Every minute she delayed was a minute closer to Morrison and his team running out of ammunition. Her radio picked up fragments of communication from Bravo team. The Yadai enemy was moving equipment into position for a final assault. They had rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. Even Navy SEALs couldn't hold indefinitely against those odds. Sarah reached the final mountain pass as the sun disappeared completely behind the peaks. In the distance, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. The battle for the compound had begun, and she was still 15 minutes away. Sarah cut the Humvee's headlights and continued driving by moonlight, navigating the treacherous mountain road by memory and instinct. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and she could see the compound ahead, lit up by muzzle flashes and the occasional explosion of a rocket-propelled grenade. She parked the vehicle behind a rocky outcropping half a mile from the compound and grabbed her equipment. Her father's rifle felt familiar in her hands as she assembled it in the darkness. The scope was a newer model than what he'd used in Vietnam, but the fundamentals remained the same. Find your target, control your breathing, squeeze the trigger smoothly. Sarah climbed up the mountainside until she had a clear view of the compound. The SEALs were trapped in a 2-story building in the center, surrounded by enemies positioned in a rough circle about 200 meters out. She could see muzzle flashes from the building's windows as Morrison's team returned fire, but their rate of fire was slowing. They were running low on ammunition. Through her scope, Sarah began identifying targets. The enemy had positioned machine gun teams at key points around the perimeter, keeping the SEALs pinned down. There were also teams with RPGs waiting for the order to destroy the building. She estimated 40 to 50 fighters in her field of view, with more moving in the shadows. Sarah's first shot took out the gunner on a heavy machine gun positioned on the compound's north wall. The man dropped silently, and it took several seconds before his companions realized what had happened. Her second shot eliminated the RPG operator who was taking aim at the SEALs building. The enemy began scanning the mountainside with flashlights, trying to locate the sniper who was systematically destroying their heavy weapons. Sarah had already moved to a new position, using lessons her father had taught her about staying mobile and invisible. Her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Unknown sniper, if you can hear this, you just saved our lives. We've got eyes on approximately 50 more hostiles moving in from the east." Sarah keyed her radio. "Bravo team, this is Martinez. I'm in overwatch position. Keep your heads down and get ready to move on my signal." There was a long pause before Morrison responded. "Martinez? The mechanic? What the hell are you doing out here?" "Right now I'm keeping you alive," Sarah replied, dropping another machine gunner with a precise headshot. "I've got transportation standing by, but we need to clear a path to your position." The enemy was getting smarter, using cover more effectively and coordinating their movements. Sarah realized she couldn't eliminate all of them from her current position. She needed to get closer and force them to make mistakes. Sarah packed up her rifle and moved down the mountainside toward the compound. She had identified a drainage ditch that would get her within 100 meters of the building, where the SEALs were trapped. It was dangerous, but it would put her in position to provide close support for their breakout. As she moved through the darkness, Sarah could hear the enemy coordinating their final assault. They were planning to hit the building from 3 sides simultaneously, using overwhelming firepower to end the siege. She had maybe 5 minutes before they launched their attack. Sarah reached the drainage ditch just as the enemy launched their coordinated assault. Rocket-propelled grenades exploded against the building where the SEALs were trapped, and machine gun fire raked the windows. The volume of incoming fire was overwhelming, designed to suppress any return fire while assault teams moved closer. From her new position, Sarah could see the enemy's battle plan unfolding. 3 teams of 8 men each were advancing on the building from different directions, while heavy weapons teams provided covering fire. It was a textbook assault that should have ended the siege within minutes. Sarah opened fire with her rifle, targeting the assault team leaders first. Her father had taught her that eliminating the leaders would cause confusion and hesitation among the followers. Her first shot dropped the team leader approaching from the south. Her second shot eliminated the machine gunner providing cover for the eastern assault team. The enemy assault faltered as commanders shouted conflicting orders in the darkness. Some fighters tried to continue the attack while others sought cover from the unknown sniper. Sarah used their confusion to devastating effect, picking off targets with mechanical precision. She switched positions after every 2 shots, moving through the drainage system like a ghost. The enemy knew there was a sniper somewhere in their midst, but they couldn't locate her position long enough to return effective fire. Sarah had turned their superior numbers into a disadvantage by forcing them to worry about threats from multiple directions. "Martinez, whatever you're doing out there, keep it up." Morrison's voice came through her radio. "We're preparing to move to the extraction point. Can you clear the north side?" Sarah looked toward the north side of the compound, where an RPG team was setting up to destroy the SEALs' escape route. "Give me 2 minutes," she replied, already moving toward their position. The RPG team never saw her coming. Sarah had learned urban combat techniques from online military forums, adapting sniper tactics for close-quarters battle. She eliminated both men with her sidearm before they could react, then grabbed their rocket launcher and turned it against a machine gun position that was raking the SEALs building. The explosion lit up the compound and temporarily blinded the remaining enemy fighters. Sarah used the confusion to sprint toward the building where Morrison's team was trapped, providing covering fire as they prepared to break out. "Bravo team, move now," she shouted into her radio while engaging 3 fighters who were trying to flank her position. Her rifle cracked repeatedly in the darkness, each shot finding its target with deadly accuracy. The SEALs burst from the building in a coordinated rush, their professional training evident even in the chaos of combat. They moved as a unit, covering each other as they advanced toward the extraction point where Sarah had hidden the Humvee. But the enemy wasn't finished. Sarah could see additional fighters moving in from the mountains, reinforcements that would cut off their escape route. She made a decision that would define the rest of the battle. Instead of following the SEALs to safety, she turned back toward the enemy reinforcements. "Martinez, where are you going?" Morrison's voice called over the radio. "Someone has to slow them down," Sarah replied, disappearing into the shadows to engage 50 fresh enemy fighters who were racing to cut off their escape route. Sarah found herself alone in the darkness, facing an enemy force that outnumbered her 50-1. The reinforcements were moving fast, trying to reach the extraction point before the SEALs could escape. She had maybe 10 minutes to delay them, and her ammunition was running low. She positioned herself in a narrow canyon that the reinforcements would have to pass through to reach the compound. It was a natural choke point, but it also meant she had no escape route. Sarah was committed to this fight whether she survived it or not. The first enemy fighters entered the canyon at a sprint, confident that nothing could stop their overwhelming numbers. Sarah's opening shot dropped the lead scout, and her second shot eliminated the squad leader. The formation bunched up in confusion, exactly what she had hoped for. Sarah had studied military history obsessively, reading about battles where small forces had defeated larger ones through superior tactics and terrain advantage. She knew that in a narrow space, numbers became less important than positioning and accuracy. Every shot had to count because she didn't have ammunition to waste. She moved constantly, using the rocky terrain to mask her position while picking off targets of opportunity. The enemy tried to advance in coordinated rushes, but Sarah's accurate fire forced them to take cover behind inadequate rocks and sparse vegetation. She had turned their numerical advantage into a liability by forcing them to fight on her terms. Her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Martinez, we're at the extraction point." "Where are you?" "Buying you time," Sarah replied between shots. "Get out of here while you can. We're not leaving without you." Sarah smiled grimly as she dropped another enemy fighter. "That's not your decision to make, Lieutenant Commander. Your mission is to get your team home alive." The enemy was getting smarter, trying to flank her position by climbing the canyon walls. Sarah had anticipated this move and prepared surprises for them. She had rigged several captured grenades as improvised booby traps, and the explosions echoed through the canyon as overconfident fighters triggered her defenses. But there were too many of them, and they were learning from their mistakes. Sarah estimated she had eliminated maybe 20 fighters, but 30 more were still trying to get through the canyon. Her ammunition was down to less than 50 rounds, and the enemy was beginning to coordinate their movements more effectively. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded near her position, showering her with rock fragments and temporarily deafening her. Sarah rolled to new cover just as automatic weapons fire raked her previous position. The enemy had brought up heavier weapons and was trying to eliminate her through firepower rather than tactics. Sarah's radio buzzed again. "Martinez, we can see muzzle flashes from your position. We're coming back for you." "Negative," Sarah replied firmly. "Complete your extraction." "That's an order." "You're not in my chain of command, Martinez." Sarah laughed despite the desperate situation. "Right now, I'm the only thing between you and 50 very angry people with automatic weapons. Follow orders and get out of here." She could hear vehicles starting up in the distance. The SEALs were finally heading home, which meant her mission was almost complete. She just had to hold this position long enough for them to get clear of the area. Sarah's ammunition counter showed 15 rounds remaining when she heard the helicopters approaching. The sound of rotor blades echoed off the canyon walls, but she couldn't tell if they were American or enemy aircraft. She had to assume the worst and keep fighting. The remaining enemy fighters heard the helicopters too and began a desperate final assault, knowing their window of opportunity was closing. They came at Sarah's position from 3 directions simultaneously, using suppressing fire and grenades to overwhelm her defenses. Sarah's rifle clicked empty, just as the first wave of attackers reached her position. She drew her sidearm and fought at close range. Using hand-to-hand combat techniques her father had taught her alongside lessons from military training videos she'd studied obsessively. Every movement was precise and deadly, conserving energy while maximum damage to her opponents. An enemy fighter rounded a boulder with his weapon raised, but Sarah was faster. Her combat knife found his throat before he could fire a shot. Another attacker tried to flank her from above, but Sarah anticipated the move and eliminated him with her last handgun rounds. The helicopters were getting closer, and Sarah could see the enemy fighters beginning to retreat toward the mountains. They had lost too many people, and accomplished nothing except confirming that American forces could reach anywhere in Afghanistan when properly motivated. Sarah slumped against a rock, bleeding from multiple wounds and completely out of ammunition. She had fought 50 enemy fighters to a standstill, with nothing but skill, determination, and lessons learned from her father's stories about Vietnam. The math was impossible, but the results spoke for themselves. Her radio crackled one final time. "Martinez, this is Eagle Flight. We have your position marked. Stay put, we're coming to get you." Sarah looked around the canyon at the evidence of the battle. 37 enemy fighters lay scattered across the rocky terrain, testament to what one properly motivated soldier could accomplish when everything was on the line. She had eliminated more enemy combatants in one night than most soldiers faced in an entire deployment. The rescue helicopter touched down in a clearing 50 meters away, and Sarah saw Morrison jumping out before the aircraft had fully landed. He ran toward her position with medical personnel close behind, his face showing a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Martinez, you crazy, magnificent woman," Morrison said as the medics began treating her wounds. "How did you do this?" Sarah smiled weakly as they loaded her onto a stretcher. "I had good teachers and better motivation. Besides, someone had to keep the backup vehicles running." The helicopter lifted off into the dawn sky, carrying Sarah back to base where she would face questions about unauthorized operations and equipment requisitions. But she would also face recommendations for the Medal of Honor and immediate promotion to a special operations unit that had been looking for someone with her unique combination of skills. Sarah Martinez had started the day as an invisible mechanic that everyone forgot was there. She ended it as a legend, the woman who eliminated 50 enemy fighters to save 8 Navy SEALs. Her father would have been proud, and her story would be told in military circles for decades to come. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices until it's too late.